Imagine waking up every single morning, knowing that the security guards stationed right outside your bedroom door are quietly calculating how much they could get paid to kill you.
Yeah, that is definitely a terrifying thought to start the day with.
Right. And you step outside, and the very people who helped you secure your high-level job, well, they are furiously plotting your downfall because they didn't get the bonuses they felt they deserved.
Oh, absolutely. And meanwhile, the general public is basically one bad harvest away from dragging you into the town square.
Exactly. And this isn't a pitch for some premium cable thriller. This is the daily, terrifying reality of a Machiavellian prince.
The sheer psychological toll of that kind of existence is, well, it's something we usually just gloss over.
We really do.
For centuries, people have approached the stack of sources we are looking at today. Niccolò Machiavelli's infamous treatise, The Prince, along with his detailed historical accounts of Duke Valentino, better known as Cesare Borgia, and the warlord Castruccio Castracani.
Yeah, people read them like a manual.
Exactly. As if they were reading a cold, calculating textbook on engineering. You read the steps, you follow the instructions, and boom, you build a perfectly functioning dictatorship.
Which is exactly the myth we are tearing down today in this deep dive. We're jumping into these original texts, but with a very specific mission.
I love this approach.
Instead of reading Machiavelli's work as this playbook for an evil genius playing four-dimensional chess, we are going to look at the profound paranoia, the suffocating fear, and the absolute insecurity that actually drive every single one of his recommendations.
Yeah, it's basically a desperate survival guide written for someone trapped in a burning building.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand this baseline anxiety, you first have to understand the massive difference Machiavelli sees between inheriting your power and taking it by force.
Right, so the text makes a sharp, really fundamental distinction between a hereditary principality and a new principality.
Inherited versus conquered.
Exactly. If you inherit a state that your family has ruled for generations, your psychological burden is, well, it's relatively light. The momentum of history is essentially doing the heavy lifting for you.
Because everyone is just used to you being in charge.
Yeah. The people are used to your family, the institutions are built around you, and as Machiavelli argues, all you really have to do is not dramatically mess up the ancient customs. It actually takes extreme incompetence to lose a hereditary state.
It's like taking over a family business where all the vendors and employees have known you since you were a kid, right? You literally just have to keep the lights on.
That is a perfect analogy.
Huh.
But a new principality. That is a completely different animal.
It sounds like a nightmare.
It is a nightmare of insecurity. The moment you acquire new power, you are fundamentally vulnerable. The text points out a brutal psychological trap that awaits every single new conqueror.
Oh, because of the people you had to step on to get there.
Yep. First, you immediately make enemies of everyone you injured, displaced, or conquered to get that power. They're just waiting in the shadows for a moment of weakness.
Just biding their time.
Right. But worse, you also inevitably disappoint the very friends who helped you get there. You can never, ever reward them enough to satisfy the inflated expectations they had when they backed your coup.
Wow, so it's like imposter syndrome, but instead of just feeling inadequate at your job, your coworkers are actively trying to overthrow you.
That is exactly it.
It sounds utterly exhausting, and the sources give us this massive cautionary tale of someone who completely buckled under this specific anxiety, King Louis XII of France.
Oh, Louis is a perfect example here.
He invades Italy, and instead of projecting strength, his entire campaign is basically a case study in anxious flailing.
Louis XII's campaign is framed as a master class in what happens when you act out of paranoia rather than secure strategy.
He just makes mistake after mistake.
Yeah, Louis wanted a foothold in Italy, so he allied with the Venetians and took Milan. But the moment he arrived, he was an outsider in a foreign land, and the insecurity just completely consumed him.
He panicked.
He started making these panic reactionary moves to build a buffer around himself, which Machiavelli famously categorizes into 5 fatal errors.
Let's break those down, because they really show the mechanics of a paranoid mind. Louis is scared, so he decides to buy off the biggest bully in the yard, which is the Pope.
Right, Pope Alexander VI.
He vastly increases the strength of the Pope by supplying him with French troops to conquer the Romagna region. Louis thought he was buying loyalty in exchange for a marriage annulment.
But mechanically, he was just giving a massive, aggressive neighbor the military muscle to eventually push France right back out of Italy.
Exactly. And that paranoia compounds, right? Louis looks at the southern half of the peninsula, the Kingdom of Naples, and he wants it.
But he's too insecure to take it alone.
So he invites the King of Spain to help him split it. The mechanism of this error is just astounding. Louis essentially unlocks the front door of Italy and hands a copy of the key to his greatest geopolitical rival.
It's just wild. Spain uses that foothold to eventually crush French influence in the entire region. Louis was so terrified of not being able to hold the territory that he brought in the very person who would take it from him.
And he also systematically crushed the minor powers in Italy, like all the small states that were terrified of the Pope and the Venetians.
Which was a huge mistake.
Right. If Louis had just been a confident ruler, those minor powers would have naturally clustered around him for protection. They would have acted as a meat shield.
But instead, he destroys his own potential buffer.
Which begs the question, I mean, if taking over a new territory is this stacked against you and the anxiety makes even kings act foolishly, how are you actually supposed to survive it?
What's fascinating here is Machiavelli's counterintuitive solution to that exact anxiety. He fully acknowledges the absolute terror of the situation, but he says the only way to cure it is immediate physical presence.
You have to actually be there.
You have to go live in the conquered territory yourself. Or, if you can't do that, you must send colonies of your own citizens to settle there.
Yeah.
You simply cannot manage it remotely.
Because if you're ruling from afar, you're just sitting at home letting your imagination run wild. Every delayed messenger feels like a coup.
Exactly. The text uses this brilliant, frankly terrifying medical metaphor to explain the mechanics of this. Machiavelli compares statecraft to a physician diagnosing a hectic fever, like tuberculosis.
Okay, how so?
Well, in the beginning, the disease is very easy to cure, but incredibly difficult to detect. You just have a slight cough. But if you let time pass without treating it, it becomes very easy to detect, but completely impossible to cure.
Oh, wow. So you have to catch it early.
Right. If a ruler lives in the new territory, they can spot the hectic fever of rebellion in its infancy. They can hear the whispers in the taverns and stop the plot.
But if they stay away?
If they stay far away in their home country, they only hear about the rebellion when the fever has consumed the whole state. By then, armies are marching and the ruler is ruined.
So you basically force yourself to move to the new hostile territory to monitor the fever, but now you're physically standing in a place where everyone hates you.
And that is terrifying.
Your immediate, desperate instinct is to buy protection. You think, I have enemies, I need guards, I need mercenaries.
Which introduces the next massive source of paranoia in the text. Relying on mercenaries or auxiliary troops is a cure that is fundamentally worse than the disease.
He absolutely hates mercenaries, doesn't he?
Machiavelli's dread of these forces is absolute. Mercenaries are professional soldiers you hire for money. Auxiliaries are soldiers you borrow from a powerful ally. And he describes both as faithless, cowardly, and ambitious.
They just don't care about you.
They have no fear of God and no fidelity to men.
Because you are basically paying a monthly subscription fee for an illusion of security.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. A monthly subscription to an illusion. The underlying mechanism of their failure is their motivation. Their only reason for keeping the field is what he calls a trifle of stipend. A paycheck.
And a paycheck is never going to be enough to make a man stand his ground when the cannons start firing.
Never. The text gives us the humiliating example of King Charles VIII of France. He swept through Italy a few years before Louis, and he did it with chalk in hand.
With chalk in hand? That is such a devastating historical insult.
It really is. It was coined by Pope Alexander VI. And it means the Italian defense apparatus was so heavily reliant on useless mercenary captains that the French army never even had to draw their swords.
They literally just walked in.
Their quartermasters just casually walked ahead of the army with a piece of chalk, marking the doors of the Italian houses where the French soldiers would sleep that night.
Unbelievable.
The entire country melted away because it was protected by rented loyalty.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We can see the actual psychological toll of this rented loyalty by looking at Cesare Borgia.
Oh, Borgia is the ultimate case study here.
Borgia's rise to power is essentially a masterclass in shifting anxieties. He starts out conquering the Romagna region using French auxiliary troops. He literally borrows the French king's army.
But he quickly realizes that the French could withdraw their troops at any moment and leave him completely defenseless.
Right. He is entirely dependent on the goodwill of a foreign king, which is an agonizing position for a paranoid ruler.
So he pivots.
Exactly. He ditches the French and hires the Orsini family, one of the premier mercenary companies in Italy. He thinks, great, I'm paying them, they work for me.
But it doesn't stay great for long.
Not at all. During a campaign, he notices the Orsini troops dragging their feet. They aren't following orders enthusiastically. Borgia uncovers that the Orsini captains are actually holding secret meetings, the Diet of Meggione, plotting to turn their weapons against him and wipe him out.
Imagine the sheer terror of that realization.
It must have been paralyzing.
Borgia is sleeping in a tent, deep in hostile territory, surrounded by thousands of heavily armed men who he now knows are actively planning his murder. He realizes that a ruler can never, ever sleep soundly unless the men outside his door are his own subjects, bound to his fate.
And that terror drives him to execute one of the most ruthless, cunning traps in military history at a place called Sinigalia.
The Sinigalia trap is infamous.
Borgia knows he can't fight the Orsini in open battle, right? He's completely outnumbered by his own mutinous army, so he feigns weakness. He acts terrified.
Which probably wasn't entirely an act at first.
Fair point. He reaches out to the mercenary captains, offers them incredibly generous terms for a peace treaty, and invites them to the town of Sinigalia to celebrate the new alliance.
He expertly manipulates their greed and their arrogance.
Exactly how he does it is chilling. The mercenary captains arrive at Sinigalia, but they leave their main armies garrisoned outside the town, thinking Borgia's just too weak to try anything.
Big mistake.
The moment these captains walk into Borgia's quarters, completely isolated from their troops, Borgia has the doors locked. He drops the cowardly act, and he has them all strangled on the spot.
Just brutal.
He decapitates the mercenary leadership in a single afternoon, absorbs their leaderless soldiers, and finally builds an army of his own loyal men.
It is a breathtakingly ruthless move, born entirely from the desperation of being surrounded by traitors.
Absolutely.
But Borgia quickly realizes that fixing the outsider problem just locks him in a room with an even bigger threat, which is his own citizens. If you don't need mercenaries anymore, you have to police your own streets.
Which brings us to the nightmare of conspiracies.
Exactly. And this leads right into the most famous and, frankly, most misunderstood debate in the entire text. Is it better to be loved or feared?
People always quote that as if it's some kind of personality quiz for sociopaths who want to inflict pain.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with sadistic pleasure.
Yeah.
It is entirely a calculated risk management strategy.
Right, because of how he views people.
Machiavelli's worldview is built on a very dark assessment of human nature. He writes that men are inherently ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, and covetous.
He really didn't think highly of us.
Not at all. If you rely on their love, you are relying on a bond of obligation. And human beings will happily break a bond of obligation the second they see a chance for personal profit.
Because love is voluntary. You just can't force someone to keep loving you.
But fear. Fear is maintained by a dread of punishment that never fails. You cannot control whether the public loves you, but through the mechanics of state power, you can absolutely control whether they fear you.
It's an anxious ruler's attempt to force predictability onto an uncontrollable environment.
Exactly that.
The sources give us this incredible, really chilling story of how Borgia engineered this fear in the Romagna. When he took over the region, it was completely lawless. I mean, constant robberies, vendettas, warlords just running rampant.
Total chaos.
Borgia needs to pacify it. But he knows that whoever cracks down on the locals is going to be deeply hated. And he doesn't want that target on his own back.
So he outsources the cruelty.
Yeah, he hires a man named Ramiro d'Orco, whom Machiavelli describes as a swift and cruel man, and gives him absolute, unchecked power to clean up the region.
And Ramiro does exactly what he was hired to do. The mechanism of his pacification is immense brutality. He uses arbitrary arrests, torture, and sweeping executions to crush the local gangs and terrify the populace into submission.
He restores peace, but the atmosphere is just suffocating.
Yeah, everyone is terrified of Ramiro.
And Borgia watches this happen, and he realizes he has a massive PR problem. The region is physically safe, but the people absolutely loathe Ramiro d'Orco. And Borgia knows that hatred is going to bleed upward.
The public will eventually turn on the prince who put the monster in charge.
Borgia is terrified of that brewing rebellion. So one morning, the people of the city of Cesena wake up, walk into the public piazza, and find Ramiro d'Orco chopped in half.
Such a violent image.
His severed body is just displayed alongside a wooden block and a bloody knife.
It is a highly calculated, highly theatrical display. Machiavelli notes that the spectacle caused the people to be at once satisfied and dismayed.
Because they hated Ramiro, but they were terrified of whoever could do that to him.
Right. Borgia solved the crime problem using Ramiro's cruelty, and then he solved the hatred problem using Ramiro's execution. He completely wiped the slate clean, proving to the people that the brutality wasn't his fault.
It was his rogue minister's fault.
Exactly. And he just rescued them from it.
Okay, wait, let me push back on this because it feels like a massive contradiction. If Borgia executes his own minister to appease an angry mob, isn't he just teaching the public that if they get angry enough, the prince will cave?
That's an interesting point.
I mean, he's the guy leaving half a body in the piazza. Doesn't ruling through that kind of terror automatically cross the line into making you hated? And isn't hatred what he was trying to avoid?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are hitting on the absolute most delicate tightrope walk in Machiavelli's entire philosophy. There is a distinct mechanical line between fear and hatred.
Okay, how does he draw that line?
Machiavelli's golden rule for a paranoid ruler is this: you can be feared, but you must not be hated.
But how does he separate the two? If you're threatening people with a bloody knife in the town square, how do they not hate you?
Hatred, according to Machiavelli, isn't born from strict laws or harsh justice. Hatred is born from deeply personal, unpredictable violations. A prince becomes hated when he arbitrarily steals his citizens' property or when he violates their women.
So it's about not crossing personal boundaries.
Yes. The text actually notes, somewhat cynically, that men will more quickly forget the death of their father than the loss of their inheritance.
Wow, that is incredibly cynical.
It is, but it's how he saw the world. As long as the citizens know their homes, their businesses, and their families are safe, they will accept a fearsome ruler.
So you can chop a corrupt politician in half in the town square and people will fear you. But the moment you arbitrarily drain a merchant's bank account, they hate you.
Exactly. Because hatred is the only environment in which an internal conspiracy can actually succeed. Think about the mechanics of an assassination plot. A conspirator takes on massive personal risk. They face the majesty of the state, the entire legal system, the prince's bodyguards.
It's basically a suicide mission.
Right. The only thing that gives a conspirator the courage to act is the belief that killing the prince will please the general public. They need to know the mob will hide them after they strike.
Which means if the public generally likes you, or at least doesn't actively hate you, the conspirator is essentially committing suicide.
The text cites the historical example of Annibale Bentivogli, the Prince of Bologna. He was deeply loved by the common people. But a rival family, the Canesci, conspired against him and assassinated him,
Thinking they would just take over.
fully expecting to take over the city. Instead, because the public held goodwill toward Annibale, the people rose up in absolute fury.
Oh, wow.
The mob hunted down the Canesci family and slaughtered every single one of them. The goodwill of the common people acts as an invisible, impenetrable shield against the dagger in the dark.
It feels like if you just follow this exhausting checklist, you can finally lock the door and sleep. You don't rely on mercenaries, you build your own army. You balance fear and goodwill so you don't get assassinated. You do everything perfectly, by the book.
And yet Machiavelli warns that you are still profoundly insecure.
Really? After all that?
Because even if a prince perfectly balances all of these incredibly delicate spinning plates, there is one massive, uncontrollable anxiety hanging over his head. Sheer dumb luck.
Chapter 25 of The Prince. The concept of fortune. It's so deeply fatalistic, it almost undoes the rest of the book.
It really is an admission of existential dread. Machiavelli compares fortune to a raging apocalyptic river. When it floods, it sweeps away trees, destroys buildings, and violently tears the soil from one bank to deposit it on another.
And you just can't stop it.
Everyone flees before it. No one can withstand its violence. Machiavelli argues that half of everything a human being does is entirely dictated by this river of fortune. 50% of your life, your success, and your survival is completely out of your control.
He does say you can build dams and barriers when the weather is calm, though. That's the preparation, right? The loyal army, the good laws, the fear without hatred.
Yes, but when the flood comes, you are still at the mercy of the water's height. And this leads to what I think is the most tragic insight in the entire text.
What's that?
The tragedy of adaptability. Rulers succeed largely because their natural temperament happens to magically align with the spirit of the times they live in.
So if you're a naturally cautious person and you live in a time that requires careful diplomacy, you look like a genius.
And if you are naturally aggressive in an era of chaos, you conquer the world. The text uses Pope Julius II as the ultimate example. Julius was incredibly impetuous in everything he did.
He didn't like waiting around.
Not at all. When he wanted to conquer Bologna, he didn't wait for his allies, the French or the Venetians, to agree to his plan. He just physically marched his army out of Rome.
which is wild for a pope to do.
It was such a reckless, sudden move that it completely paralyzed the King of France. The king ended up sending troops to help Julius just to avoid alienating him.
So Julius succeeded because his unhinged momentum broke the existing rules of warfare. But the text explicitly says that if he had lived longer, he would have been ruined.
Because the times eventually change. The weather shifts. If circumstances had suddenly required patience, caution, and delicate diplomacy, Julius would have been completely destroyed.
Because he couldn't adapt.
Exactly. Because the mechanics of human psychology prevent us from changing our underlying nature. If you have spent your entire life prospering by kicking the door down, no one can ever persuade you to start knocking quietly.
So what does this all mean? It means the ultimate tragedy of the Machiavellian prince is that you are forever trapped in your own psychological hardwiring.
It really is a trap.
You spend your entire life violently building these perfect dams against the river of fortune, lying awake at night worrying about mercenaries in your camp and conspiracies in your city. But in the end, you're just sitting in a fortress, helplessly waiting for the weather to change.
Your own personality is basically the ticking time bomb.
Exactly.
It is a state of perpetual, inescapable anxiety. The entire pursuit of absolute power is essentially the pursuit of a security that simply does not exist.
Which totally reframes how you have to look at these texts. The Prince isn't a villain's playbook for world domination. It's a survival guide for the deeply terrified.
Right.
Every act of cruelty, every broken promise, every theatrical execution in the public piazza, it all stems from a profound vulnerability and the absolute dread of losing control.
And to really bring that home, the sources offer a final, incredibly poignant story, the life and death of Castruccio Castracani.
The warlord of Lucca. Through most of the text, he is presented as the ultimate Machiavellian success story.
He is the model student. Castruccio spent his entire life mastering these exact arts. He refused to rely on others. He schemed constantly.
He was incredibly ruthless.
He fought brilliant, deceptive battles, and he ruthlessly executed his rivals to build a massive, powerful state in Tuscany. He did everything Machiavelli advised to secure himself.
But then, after a victorious battle, he stands in the wind to greet his returning soldiers, catches a fever, and dies at the age of 44.
A completely unpreventable stroke of bad luck.
The raging river of fortune just takes him out.
And as he lies dying, at the absolute height of his military glory, he summons his heir, Pagolo Guinigi. And the speech he gives is not a triumphant boast about the empire he built.
Not at all.
It is overflowing with deep regret and intense anxiety.
He finally realizes the trap he spent his whole life building for himself.
He tells his heir that he is leaving behind a realm that is unsettled and insecure. He looks around and realizes he is surrounded by vengeful enemies, like the Florentines.
Who have just been waiting decades for a moment of weakness to strike.
Exactly. Castruccio actually confesses that he wishes he had been content with less. He wishes he had made friends instead of enemies, so he could have lived a more peaceful life and left his family a safer inheritance.
He conquered half of Tuscany, but he died utterly terrified for his family's survival.
Castruccio mastered the mechanics of power, but it brought him zero peace. He died just as insecure as a new prince on his very first day.
We started this deep dive looking at the muddy waters of history, trying to see past the myth of the cold, calculated mastermind to find the terrified human being underneath. And we definitely found him.
We really did.
But the psychological reality we uncovered leaves you with something much bigger to ponder. Think about your own life and the modern world we live in.
It's super relevant today.
We constantly chase absolute security, whether it's hoarding wealth, building literal and metaphorical walls around ourselves, or ruthlessly climbing the corporate ladder to ensure no one has the power to fire us.
We think if we just get enough leverage, we can finally relax.
But if Machiavelli's hidden truth is right, does the very act of desperately building all that heavy armor guarantee that you will spend your entire life trapped inside it, suffocating, and never actually feeling safe?
That is a haunting thought to leave on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the original texts. Keep questioning the motives behind the history you read, and we'll see you next time.